this is Chris and welcome back to Punk and Paisley. In today's video, we're going to take a look at this album, Petra Janu Pro-Rock, Exploduj, an album which I'm almost certain that virtually none of you have ever heard of. With good reason. It's Czech. It's from Czechoslovakia. It's old enough it's not even from Czechia or the Czech Republic yet, because it was still the larger country. Recorded in 1979. Came out, depending on what I read, in 79 or 80, and is positively fascinating. So at first, let me just tell you how I came across this album. I did actually find it at a record fair. In general, I do not go to record fairs for a couple of reasons. One is they're usually door charges, and I positively refuse to pay a cover charge at the door to attend a flea market or any sort of show where you're expected to be purchasing items. I don't pay to enter a store. Maybe these are throughout the country, but in Philadelphia for a number of years, there's been the punk rock flea markets. It costs money to get into the punk rock flea market. The vendors pay for the tables at the punk rock flea market. This to me is about the most completely or anti-punk rock thing that I could possibly imagine. I don't pay to go into a record fair. So a few friends of mine who are also huge music geeks called me up and said, hey, this Saturday, we're going to go to this record fair. Is there a charge? No, there's no charge. It was in, I believe, the Fishtown section of Philadelphia, which was being gentrified, pretty different than the Fishtown from when I grew up. I kind of expect the worst with pricing, with pretentiousness in a heavily gentrified neighborhood in a major city. But I went, and I'm glad I went. And I remember having a great day. I associate this album with just having a great Saturday with a few friends of mine who are also really into music. We went to a diner, I remember, had a good lunch, hung out. And the reason that I can hang a year on when this happened, it would have been 2011, I believe. Possibly 2012, but probably 2011. There's a very strange association that I have with that, which is that one of my friends in this circle, and we're all guys who used to work together, and I was hired in part because of my love of music. We worked at this historic site where the manager was asking us in the interview process what kind of music we were into, and you had to have some damn good answers and be up on your musical knowledge, because this historic site had a lot of sitting around. We would sit around a lot and we would kind of shoot the crap with each other. Sometimes there'd be two of you sitting at a post for an hour at a time. We'd pass around back issues of Mojo magazine, talk about music a lot. So there was actually the brilliance that one of my friends had, who was the hiring manager at that point, which was, well, most of what you do is hanging around with each other all day, and you don't want to be stuck with some dud, and you want to be able to talk about things like music and cool movies and that sort of thing. So I'm going to make that part of the interview process, because otherwise virtually all of the people applying to this job are qualified for it. You just want to do the social thing of figuring out that these are people that you actually want to spend 60 hours a week with or more. And that actually turned out to be a brilliant portion of the hiring strategy. And I made the cut. You know, my tastes of music were exotic and I guess interesting enough that I could hold my own in a conversation. You know, gabba gabba one of us. I'm in the car with these three guys. We're headed on up to Fishtown. I lived in South Philly at the time. The conversation turns around to new information for me, which is that one of the guys in the car, who I'd known for I don't know, several years at this point, it turns out was first cousins with an extremely famous Hollywood star. And I mean, like, close cousins. They grew up together. They were in regular contact. The only reason I didn't see said Hollywood star around, apparently, was because they were in Hollywood. They lived in LA. They were making movies. There was an announcement of a major role in a major film. A film big enough that I can say that more than half the people watching this video have seen it. I can state that with almost absolute certainty. And I can state with virtual absolute certainty that if you speak English, you're listening to me. And many of you who don't speak English, if you're listening to me, know who this person is. extremely famous Hollywood star. Had no idea was first cousins with one of my friends. And he doesn't bring it up a lot. He doesn't, he's not trying to brag. He's not trying to squeeze in on their fame or whatever. But I could date when I bought the record by looking up when the film was made and probably when the announcement would have been made of this role being filled. So we're talking 2011, I'm pretty sure. So I've had this record for 14 years. And we get to the record fair and it was pretty cool. It wasn't huge, but there were a good number of dealers. Prices, of course, you're going to be paying full retail. This is another reason why I don't like to go to record fairs. You're paying full retail or better sometimes. People know exactly what they have. You're usually not getting any bargains unless somebody has a bargain bin. They're trying to get rid of things. I have to do a whole video on pricing at flea markets and record fairs and vintage stores and all of that. We need to discuss that, because as a person myself who's been selling records for 20 years, I think some people's compass for how they should be pricing things is fairly well off. But this I found to be really reasonable. I forget, I either paid $10 or $15 for this album, and I was happy to, and it's in fantastic condition. It's on the Supraphone label, which was the state label of Czechoslovakia. Maybe within that week, it wasn't that same day, eventually put the needle on the record, and just absolute surprise and delight. Felt similarly, not exactly the same, about Petra Janu Pro-Rock as the first time that I heard Os Mutantes. And the way that I heard Os Mutantes the first time, like a lot of people who were psych collectors and not necessarily primarily into Brazilian music and got into them through Tropicalia, but came in through the psych side of things, where you were expanding your horizons into other countries, other languages that you didn't necessarily know, to find the good global psych. And the Lawaka Bop CD compilation, which I think is called Anything is Possible or Everything is Possible, that's where I first heard Os Mutantes. Got them on my radar, and I eventually found their other releases. This album does not sound like them. However, there was just so much going on with Os Mutantes, with so many different influences, the kitchen sink thrown in terms of instrumentation, the innovation that they had using even non-musical instrument objects to make different sound effects and percussion and that sort of thing for their album. I feel similarly about this with this album. Recorded in 1979, Petra Janu was born Jana Petru, which is apparently a rather common name if you speak Czech, and there was another singer who already had that name. So she changed her stage name, the name by which she's been known for decades, into Petra Janu, which is sort of a reverse of it's reversing the two names and also reversing the vowel sounds on the end of a couple of names in order to come up with a new name. And she has been a fixture in Czech music apparently for decades. She had a new release as recently as 2017. Here she is looking very much like she's ready to do some ABBA. This looks like the cover of an ABBA album, 1979. She's at the disco. And that is not at all what this record sounds like. If that were the only image that I saw here back in 2011 or so, before it would have been super easy to pull out my phone and look some things up on the internet about the album, I probably would have left this where it was, assuming it was a light pop, a disco album, in fact. It was the front cover when you have Exploduj as the title of the record, and that translates as explodes, explosion, that sort of thing. My Czech is a little weak. You'll have to take my word for it that I've tried looking these things up, and give me a little grace with that and my pronunciation. But when you get the fireworks, and you have what looks like very much a rock setup here. And she looks like she's about to belt something out, or is belting something out on the cover. So I went more by that. And I'm also a sucker for having music from a country that I didn't have music from before. Subsequent to this, I found some Czech prog albums in thrift stores that were okay. I ended up selling, wasn't super into them, including a double album. I'm not going to recall the title of the band or the album right now. I bought, for example, back in the 90s, I bought a cassette compilation of some punk songs just because it was out of Luxembourg. And there were a couple bands from Luxembourg, and I didn't own any music from Luxembourg, so I figured for a few dollars I'll go for it. It's sort of a weird completist that way. Like, can I have music from every country in the world? Or at least music that I'd be interested in from every country in the world. And I don't think I had a Czech rock album. I had some other Eastern European albums. So I went with that, and when I put the needle on, the record is described on Discogs as pop rock and prog rock, both of which are accurate, but both of which also do not give you nearly enough information. This is not prog rock in the sense of Yes, or ELP, or Van der Graaf Generator, or any band like that. There aren't terribly long pieces on here. I think there's one track that is 6 minutes long, and that is only because it's a slow track. You know, if it were faster paced with the same, it might be 4 minutes long, but it's a very slow song. And that, as a result, it's a 6 minute long song, and everything else is coming in at about 3 minutes. Prog in the sense that there are complex song structures, prog in the sense that everything is thrown in, the kitchen sink is thrown in into the production. You get vocoder type robot voices, you get flanging, you get phasing, you get echo effects, you get echoplex, you get reverb. You get a very dense production sound at times. At times it sounds almost like a 70s Joe Meek is producing this. And there's everything in it. There's the kitchen sink in it. And there's a lot to take in. If you don't like a part of one of these songs, don't worry, you just wait 15 or 45 seconds, and there's a change in tempo. There's a change in time signature. Now, I will say it's also not prog in the sense that there's a slight amount of complexity to the rhythm section, but there is not instrument virtuosity. Okay, you're not listening to this if you want to hear Neil Peart drumming or a lot of prog acts, complex drumming, or some nu metal, crazy time signature rapid drumming. You're not getting so much of that. You're not getting these innovative fills, and you're not getting these innovative ways of playing with time signature with the drumming. You are getting somebody who's holding down rock rhythms, and these rhythms change throughout the song. So, you know, don't listen to it for that. I would listen to it for the songwriting. I've looked up translations of these lyrics, and you have, you know, the first song is called Explosion or Explodes. The next one is the Queen of Benzene, the Queen of Gasoline, effectively. You have Demons from Davic, which is apparently a neighborhood in Prague, and Dr. Q. You have a We Are Not Groggy. You have a song titled Little Song. That is the 6 minute long one, which I would say is something that could be one of the more mellow 70s Pink Floyd tracks, something you could see somebody putting headphones on and sort of mellowing out to, man. But a lot of these are really aggro. I hear a band that was listening to a little bit of Led Zeppelin. Maybe they were listening to a little bit of When the Levee Breaks. I hear a band that was definitely listening to some 70s Pink Floyd, might have been listening to some 60s Pink Floyd. This band also, however new wave and or punk got its way into the Czech Republic, or at the time Czechoslovakia, there's some angry guitar in here. There are times when Petra sounds a little pissed off. She is a talented, proper singer. A place to start might be somewhere in between Grace Slick and Polystyrene, and maybe a few percentage points of Ima Sumac. She's a proper singer, and most of her recordings through her career have been pretty staid, regular pop and rock recordings. One of her albums from the mid-'80s, I see, says, you know, pop rock and experimental, but for the most part, most of her recorded output is pretty staid. And here we really go for it artistically. Now, apparently the reason for this is that pro-rock's mainspring was a guy named Ota Petrina. You'll have to excuse me. It's a sound in Czech that we don't have in English. And that guy, who is sadly deceased, seems to have been the mainspring of some prog type bands in Prague in the 70s and into the 80s. I actually want to check out a couple of his albums that I looked up on Discogs. He seems to have also been behind a prog band that's more traditionally prog called Super Robot or Super Robot. Got me with the name already, and they seem to have put out 2 space-themed albums in the early 80s, which has me fascinated, and they look like they're pretty cheap as well. But this album is just super interesting. I looked up Petra back in, it would have been around 2012, 2011, and it looked like she was still playing live shows at that time. She was playing some big club in Chicago, some Czech association or something like that in Chicago, which should be no surprise because Chicago has such large populations from Central and Eastern Europe. So if you were to pick a city in the United States outside of New York where you would figure she'd be playing, Chicago would be it. Pro-Rock put out one other album with her a couple of years earlier. I've heard a couple of good tracks from that. That's described as pop rock. I've heard a couple sort of new wavy proto-punk tracks from the previous album. But for me, this is a winner. There's almost nobody who enjoys rock who isn't going to enjoy some of this. Most people are not going to enjoy all of it. The final track, title of which apparently translates as "the concert ends" or "the concert is over," is their sort of send-off, their sort of waving bye-bye lighter track, which is sort of, you know, Beatles' Day in the Life, but nowhere near as good as Day in the Life, nowhere near as innovative. And aside from that and the Little song, these are up-tempo rockers. I mean, these are rock tracks, and there's a lot thrown in there. There's a lot of experimentation thrown in. I think it's a super interesting album. I would never have heard of this unless I blindly stumbled across it at the record fair. And it turns out 10 to 15 bucks is probably... I came in a little under what you would pay right now for a clean copy of this on Discogs with shipping. They're probably going to come from Europe. If you're in Europe, you're paying $4.99, €5 for a clean copy plus postage. So you're getting away. If you're in the EU, you're probably going to pay for that maybe about €15. You're going to have to tack on 5 or 10 bucks if you're in the US and postage to get it. But I think it's an underrated, undermentioned, underpriced album. How many of those can you mention that are these days that are actually maybe underpriced? If you could get past Petra's voice, my wife could not. My wife likes a lot of different music, and she did not like her voice one little bit. But if you are an X-Ray Specs fan, if you like early Jefferson Airplane, if you can get past a strong, often vibrato, belting it out, proper singer female voice with your experimental rock, I highly recommend it. It was a great stumble across things find of mine. And that's about it, folks. I hope you enjoyed this video. We're trying to get the subscribers up. Like, share, all that good stuff. Love to hear anything in the comments. And as always, keep on rocking in the unfree world.